Alright, here we go. Finally talking about Dark Souls 2. The one Fromsoft game I have never been able to bring myself to love. The only Fromsoft game I've beaten only once, and that was almost 10 years ago. So like a crack addict after beating Shadow of the Erdtree for the third time, I still wanted more of that juicy Souls-like gameplay. So I decided, you know what? Let's finally give Dark Souls 2 another try. We all know that the game is still divisive in the community today. Like I said, I've only beaten the game once, and it was a long time ago, which is pretty rare for me. I replay all the Fromsoft games quite often. Part of me really does think that my weird hate stems from how divisive the game is. Some people hate Dark Souls 2 with a burning passion, while some people say it's their favorite Souls game. So the discussion around the game has always pushed me away whenever I thought about giving it another chance. But now I've got this channel, and I love talking about Fromsoft, so I'll take any excuse I can get. But Dark Souls 2 has been staring me down in my Steam library, so I figured what better time than now to give it another fair chance. And after beating it once, then twice, I can say I was wrong about Dark Souls 2. So let's dive into this divisive game, starting with my favorite part about it, and that is the Dark Souls 2 atmosphere. The atmosphere in this game, starting with the opening cinematic all the way to the end, it's actually so good. There was something really special about stepping into Majula for the first time, with its beautifully haunting music and sad, depressing NPCs. And where the f do I go again? Majula is hands down the best hub in the entire series, and I love me my Firelink Shrine. Every zone in the entire game except for one is just so magnetic. You can't help but be sucked into the world while you're exploring because the atmosphere is just so good. Drain Lake Castle is so eerie with its dark, rainy, desolate design. You got the brutal pirate area, no man's wharf, where everything wants to beat your ass, but you also can't be mad because it's a huge wake-up call to take things slow and absorb the area around you. And that brings me to my second favorite thing about Dark Souls 2, and I think you're either going to agree with this take or you're going to think I need to be sent to an institution, and that opinion is that I really like the level difficulty in Dark Souls 2. I'm not sure if it's due to the fact that I just got done speedrunning the shit out of Elden Ring, just booking it to each boss and whatnot, but there are very few instances in Dark Souls 2 where you can run through every enemy, rushing to the zone boss. You can definitely do it, but from my experience, it was not worth the hassle and frustration. Dark Souls 2 makes you master the area before you can master the boss, and I'd honestly say that I died more to the zones than the actual bosses in this game. I think a great example of this is the Iron Keep. There are so many fucking enemies in this area. You got 10 knights sprinting at you on top of 4 archers just straight aimbotting your ass, so it's very difficult to run through this area. You just gotta slow down and take out every enemy before you can walk through that fog wall. And even then, it'll take you a few tries to really master the proper way to clear it out safely. And then you finally get to the Smelter Demon and the stakes feel even higher. You know that if you fuck this boss up, you gotta clear out the entire zone again. And this might be where people disagree with me and they just think that it's a pain in the ass. And I can understand why you would feel that way, but it's so refreshing having zones and mobs actually matter. And when you finally slay the zone boss and light that next bonfire, it feels so satisfying. There are still some bosses where you can easily just run to them, but I really appreciated the zones where that wasn't an option and forced me to slow down. There was one zone though, one zone that I genuinely think is the worst zone ever, period, and that's the Frigid Outskirts in the old Ivory King DLC. I don't understand this zone at all. It's fucking dog shit. I don't want to play red light, green light in a fucking blizzard while being the victim of a hit and run over and over again by these nasty fucking horses. I wouldn't hate this zone so much if there was a bonfire like halfway to the boss, but there isn't. I finally said fuck it, I'm going on a hunting expedition and I don't give a It was the only time in both my playthroughs that I used summons, and I have zero regret. Like literally f the zone. I'd rather fight the Bed of Chaos with no cheese than replay the zone again. So the zones are great for the most part, but how are the bosses? And you know, Dark Souls 2 is the perfect example of quantity over quality. There are so many bosses in this game, and there are very few that are actually memorable. I mean, shit, we got the Royal Rat Vanguard, a 6 gargoyle boss fight. Dark Souls 2 loves multiple enemy boss fights. It's actually crazy and also forgettable. It's hard for me to even think of bosses that I truly enjoyed outside of the DLCs. I did like the Smelter Demons. I thought they were pretty cool. The blue Smelter Demon was an absolute bitch to get to though. The last boss, Nashandra, was enjoyable because of the lore revolving around her being the queen and what she did to Vendrick. Not that I knew what was going on in the story per usual, but I knew this bitch was crazy. And then at the end, you're like, oh shit, I was right. I also thought Little Yorm Jr. was cool, but my favorite bosses were in the old Iron King DLC. Fume Knight, so fucking good. Sir Alone, Alan, so fucking good. From both of their arenas to their mechanics and animations, I really enjoyed them. Honestly, the worst part about them is that they're in the DLC and you fight them basically back to back. It was just over too soon. Seriously though, the Dark Souls 2 DLCs really surprised me. And since I've never played them before, it was great having some new content. And although it has been a really long time since my first and only Dark Souls 2 playthrough, as I progressed through the game, everything slowly came back to me as I remembered each zone and boss. My brain and memory is just so fucking massive. But anyway, my least favorite DLC was probably the Sunken King, but it was far from being bad. The zone was stunning and had some interesting mechanics like the ghost dudes. I was low-key shitting bricks trying to make my way through it. The secret boss is pretty mid, just another 1v3, but my favorite boss in the DLC was probably the first main one, which was Alana. I really liked her design, and then the final boss, Sin. Not like I haven't fought 1,000 dragons by this point in my Fromsoft grind. But anyway, you could probably guess what my favorite DLC is. Obviously the old Iron King DLC. One hand, it has the best fights in the entire game, and two, I just feel like the DLC flowed really well. And then we have the last DLC I played, which was the Ivory King DLC, which I loved the snow zone, maybe not that snow zone. And I know I talked a lot of shit about the frigid outskirts, but besides that god-awful area, I thought the rest of the DLC had some banging level design. The main bosses were pretty good, especially the Burnt Ivory King. I thought it was a pretty unique boss fight where you got your own army of dudes fighting with you to close these gates of chaos, and then the boss walks out of his big portal, and it was just honestly so sick. Nonetheless, the amount of content in these DLCs is honestly insane, and I was really happy I got to play through them for the first time. All of these aspects about Dark Souls 2 really surprised me. Obviously the zone and level design and the unmatched atmosphere, but there are some things, especially with the gameplay, that I wasn't really a fan of. I think my biggest issue besides the bosses is the adaptability stat, probably the most important stat in the entire game. This stat makes your rolls more reliable by giving you more iframes. It also makes you heal faster, and you're gonna need that because goddamn, it takes forever to take the swig out of your Estus. If you're going a no shield build like I did, you're gonna need to hit that soft cap on agility if you want to roll properly. Especially at the beginning of the game, it really feels like your hitbox is the size of a fucking stadium. You could have the most beautiful, perfectly timed roll and still get clapped. I know a lot of people really dislike this change because it felt really unnecessary, especially because Dark Souls 1 had it down perfectly. And in the end, it's not really that big of a deal. All you gotta do is just pump some levels into it and then you're totally fine. But it just seems so unnecessary. The movement itself in the game just feels really clunky too. It's kind of hard to explain. And I know I just got done playing Elden Ring, which has some of the best movement, but I still try to keep my opinion in check the entire time. It doesn't feel as smooth and snappy as Dark Souls 1 did. But anyway, my last complaint is probably gonna be a hot take. I struggled without auto aim while locking on. Like once I found out I had to actually manually aim my greatsword, holy fuck, it took me so long to adjust. The amount of times I fucked up because of this was insane. But I just had to get good and I was fine. But even by the end of the game, I was still completely missing hits because of this. I like how in Dark Souls 3 they kept this option for the people that enjoyed it, but I'm also happy they let you turn it off for garbage players like me. And I could see how manually aiming your attacks better suits some people, but me, absolutely not. Other than that though, I don't really have a whole lot of complaints about this game besides the bosses we talked about earlier. I do think Dark Souls 2 has a really unique feel and vibe that the other games haven't come anywhere near. I think that's why Dark Souls 2 has some really dedicated fans. The game also has some really great build variety too. My first playthrough, I went with my greatsword like I do with any other Fromsoft game, but then I went with the hex build, and man, the hexes in Dark Souls 2 are so fun. All in all though, to wrap things up, I'm willing to admit that I was wrong about Dark Souls 2, and it's a really unique experience that's not found in any other FromSoft or Souls game. And while it's still definitely my least favorite Souls game, I have a newfound respect for it, and all it took was for me to finally give the game another fair chance all these years later. And while I am extremely happy that Miyazaki didn't lead the development of this game because he was making my beloved Bloodborne, I really do gotta wonder what this game would have looked like if he was at the helm of development. Well, I guess that's probably just Dark Souls 3, so never mind. But anyway, if you're a Dark Souls Souls 2 lover, I finally understand you. Or if you're a Dark Souls 2 hater, maybe give the game another shot. Even if you disliked certain aspects, there was so much content in this game, it's actually crazy. And I feel like everybody's bound to find some enjoyment out of it in one way or another. But anyway, I think it's a great place to call the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. I'm gonna throw all my other FromSoft videos in the description for you to check out if you enjoyed this one. I got a bunch of videos lined up for the future. I finally got Armored Core 6 that I'm really excited to play. I also really want to do a video on Hollow Knight. But anyways, I will see you guys in the next video, and yeah, peace.